What's going on, y'all? Shout out to the LDPC. It's your boy Fight Critic, here to give you guys another boxing video. So, there was once a time that Sergey Kovalev was seen as one of the best fighters in the sport, like pound for pound. Like, he was considered to be the best pound for pound fighter in the sport. Because what he had been able to do in the light heavyweight division was considered to be almost unreal at a time. And it wasn't because he was fighting guys and winning, his fights and collecting titles and X, Y, and Z. But it was just the sheer fashion of the way he was destroying and dismantling guys, winning his titles and defending it. And at some point, it had, for a lot of people, it made them consider him to be the best fighter in the sport. And on the flip side of the coin, I think he was dubbed that title considering to who he was on his pathway of facing next. And for somebody like Sergey Kovalev, he had everything in front of him. But I still think there was one piece of the equation that was missing. And that was the fact that he had a golden opportunity to become the undisputed light heavyweight champion if his promoter chose to go through with the purse bid at the time that his team lobbied for him to be made mandatory for that title. And of course, what I mean is Sergey Kovalev, the first time he beat Jean Pascal, his team prior to the fight lobbied the WBC to make him what would be considered the quote-unquote diamond champion, which meant that in some fashion he would be able to supersede a mandatory and to challenge Stevenson for that championship. And Jean Pascal wanted no business in doing that. So Jean Pascal had made it known had he won the fight, he didn't want anything to do with being Stevenson's mandatory. But for Sergey Kovalev, his team wanted to do it because they kind of felt like Stevenson would drop the title. And when it became known that Stevenson wasn't going to drop the title and that, the WBC ordering the purse bid was something that Stevenson's team wanted to do, Duva and Kovalev chose not to go through with it. They chose not to fight Adonis Stevenson. And then it kind of spiraled into Stevenson, going elsewhere, Sergey Kovalev still having a lot of options, but he just didn't look like to be the same sort of, unstoppable force, which kind of leads into, the Andre Ward fights where he loses the first fight, and albeit in a close fight that is definitely highly argued which way you want to call it. I can't argue against people who feel as if he won the first fight against Ward, because there's definitely evidence that you can say so. But the second fight, Andre Ward stops him. And then you see Sergey Kovalev come back and he fights Shabransky, another guy who people built up to be Andre Ward, sort of, the antichrist to him. And then he becomes a world champion. He gets a really big win against, what's his name? It's losing me. Yard. He gets a huge win against Anthony Yard. And then he steps into the Canelo fight, and then he looks as if he throws the fight. We didn't see anything in Sergey Kovalev that fight against Canelo Alvarez that proved to us that he should have obviously won that fight convincingly. He just didn't look like he did. So it begs the question of, well, did Sergey Kovalev throw the Canelo Alvarez fight? But it ultimately just made me feel like Sergey Kovalev is just a mentally weak person as when it comes to boxing. And now you're seeing the multitude of it, of him testing positive for PEDs. If you're a high-level athlete, you're taking PEDs because ultimately you lack the mental capacity to make yourself better. And that's the way that I've always looked at things, especially in boxing. I'm okay with PEDs being in sports like baseball because it's not much of a contact sport. But when you look at, the aspects of boxing, you're shortening a person's lifespan. So for Sergey Kovalev, for him to take that shortcut, it's quite pathetic, and it's kind of, it kind of tells a lot of where his career has gone, stemming back to that Stevenson situation. And it's quite sad, but he brought it on himself, sadly.